Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 2026 Giller Book Club. My name is Jacob, and I'll be your host for tonight. Some quick notes before we get things started. Just first off, please make sure you have your Zoom on a side-by-side view for the best possible viewing experience. Our conversation is also going to be followed by a Q&A period, so if you have any questions for André, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. It's now my profound pleasure to introduce our interviewer for the evening, Charles Foran. Charlie is the author of 12 books, including 5 novels. Most recently, he published the memoir Just Once, No More. Now, without further ado, I'll hand things over to André and Charlie. Take it away, guys.
Jacob, thank you. Some of the most original and exciting fiction published in Canada in my lifetime has been written by André Alexis. He is highly acclaimed, widely read, and consistently innovative, probing, and restless as an artist. You would know him, you will know him, of course, from his many novels, including 15 Dogs, from his book of essays, his play, perhaps. And Andre, I may be going down the list of what people know, his children's book, and a personal favorite. And I believe he hosted one of the most pleasurable CBC radio programs called Skylarkin a few years ago. It's a great pleasure for me to speak with Andre tonight. Andre, how are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you.
Great.
Nice introduction, Charlie.
When was Skylarking on CBC?
It feels like forever ago, but it's probably only like 10 years. It's so hard. You know what screws everything up is COVID. So you have to add like 2 years to that. So
Yes.
let's say 12 years ago. I'm not
Okay.
sure. Yeah, it's something like that. And that was the second one. I did a show called Radio Nomad, which I really liked doing as well. I sort of feel like I wish I had those scripts because I had to write them fast, and it was very much like getting all the stuff off of your id onto the page and then accompanying that with music, which is my first love is music.
Yes. And that was very evident in the show. And I thought the language music ratio was unusual and wonderful, and it felt very thought through and organic at
Yeah,
the same time as a kind of chronology every night.
I think like a lot of people who are lonely when they're kids, music tends to be your friend. And so for, my teens, that was just a very huge thing, a kind of presence, which is interesting because it was mostly a presence from Detroit. So we were listening to Motown at the
Yeah.
time when we were growing up and, making tapes of all that sound and stuff. So yeah, I wanted to be a musician, but I can't stand the company of musicians, is how I tell myself. And I don't like marijuana. It's my least favorite drug. So
So don't like drugs, don't like musicians, but otherwise it would have been
yeah, I
it would
love
have been a
music.
career. Well, we're here tonight to talk about other worlds, and just for the folks watching, we have about an hour, and Andre and I are going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then we very much hope you have some questions or even comments to share. And as you know, in this format, you just post them on your question tab, and we will try and get to them. Andre, let me start by discussing other worlds in the context of you coming out of what was a remarkable, intense project of producing 5 related or connected novels over about a 12-year period,
Hmm.
the Quincunx series. When you finished that and you published 20 in 2021, Ring, that was the most recent, final. Did moving back to short fiction did it come as not as a relief, but as a welcome change of speed or tone for you after all those years immersed in that
I,
big,
I can't,
big project?
I can't remember if you do short stories too, don't you, Charles?
I don't. I wrote a
Oh,
few when
you
I was
don't.
young, but
Okay. So the thing with, I guess, maybe writers of my generation, and maybe it's a Canadian tradition, I don't know. Our only Nobel Prize winner being Alice Munro and a short story writer, it feels kind of like a given that you can start off with short stories, and I did. And so short stories are a kind of first block, a first place short stories and poetry, in fact. But short stories took over my imagination before, more powerfully and deeper than maybe poetry did. Um, and so when I go back to short stories, it's a return to something that I know and I started out with. But the paradox is it's also the most frightening thing that I do because there tends to be a large space between this short story and the next one. And I always feel like I've forgotten how to write a short story when I try to write a short story. And that's both terrifying and kind of exhilarating too, because you can just go in and feel like you're doing something new. So going back to short stories after the Quincunx was a relief. It was fine. And it was a challenge as well. And I have to say that with Other Worlds, the return to short stories was also strangely coinciding with a return to thinking about home, thinking about growing up, thinking about my parents, thinking about their deaths.
Mhm.
All of that came back while doing something that is, I don't want to say instinctive. I learned how to write short stories, but that is there at the base of who I am.
You mentioned some of those factors, time being a prominent one. You wrote this book in your mid-60s, and it both addresses and was written at a time when you were experiencing primal losses with parents specifically. Did anything about the book anything of the book feel, no pun based, I know you the final short essay or what it is called an elegy, but did anything about the book feel elegiac to you or
Do you know, it's the strangest thing. Yes, obviously, the death of my father in 2019 was a huge watermark. You know, you becoming well, having no safety net in a way. Your parents are always a kind of safety net, and you becoming an orphan, as people put it, is obviously a traumatic. But I have to say, Charles, this was also mixed up with the death of Steve Hyten and Richard Sanger. Richard I knew well, Steve I knew not very well at all, but they were writers who started out more or less at the same time as I did. And so their deaths, to my surprise, also hit me fairly strong. Like, oh, that's a part of my classmates, I suppose, in a way,
Mhm.
dying, and that was a surprise. It's the same kind of surprise as reading Margaret Atwood's new autobiography, personal memoir. That's I know all the people that she's talking about because they're the generation before ours. So I know who David Bennell is. I know who Ellen Seligman is. I know the writers that she's talking about, and I know the ones that have died. And so I'm again aware just of my going towards the edge of the cliff, you know. It's interesting that literary deaths, death of writers from my generation, Richard in particular, was kind of hard. I liked Richard. Richard was a friend and a fellow writer, and being part of the same guild and losing a member is also somewhat traumatic.
And I would add to that list Andrew Piper died so
Yes,
young.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Although he's more recent.
yeah, a little
Andrew
bit.
dying was also his death is more recent. That sort of came after I had written these stories, so it didn't influence the writing of these stories. But
Mhm.
yeah, Andrew's a similar case.
Is it surprising to you, and we're almost the same age, and I've been thinking a lot about some same things lately. Is it surprising that it's unsurprising that you would be surprised that people die?
You know it's coming, but it's always a surprise when it comes. It's one of those things, you know. I imagine the last moment before I kick it, it'll be, wait, I'm dying? That's not supposed to happen. But of
Right.
course, I know that it's going to happen. So it's one of those things that you need to write short stories and poems about because it's kind of like the receding horizon. You can never get to it. Then once you do, it's over.
And once you do, it's over. D- Did you, do you, do you have any sense that the prose in other worlds is a little more receptive or inflected with mortality, or is that more of a cerebral thought as opposed to a craft thought?
I think uh, I don't. When you say that you're kind of influenced by this kind of sense of the elegiac,
Hmm.
it doesn't mean that you write towards that. It means that that might be the initial spark, and then you go into all the things that concern you. And in a way, you can be surprised at the end. Oh, this collection is filled with, you know, the elegiac, lands that I've known and loved, Southern Ontario, Ottawa. These things fill it, and that's because the original spark, this kind of sense of loss, inspired a lot of the stories. But I don't think you go into a collection or a novel or anything, in my experience, wanting to prove something. You want to explore something, and I suppose that's what ended up happening. As for my the way that I write, the style, I'm becoming more and more aware that there's an André Alexis way of going about things, which is disturbing and unpleasant, but it's also natural. I mean, I've been doing this since I was 19. I'm now 69. That's 50 years of trying to be a writer or being a writer. So it would be weird if I hadn't settled on some aesthetic, some way of writing. So, and I have. And I was aware of, in writing Other Worlds, I was also aware of my literary influences. That's another kind of family that you have. The books that at random and sometimes you take in. So I happen to read and be blown away by War and Peace. I happen to read and be blown away by Beckett's trilogy, by Proust's In Search of Lost Time, and you can go through these books, and that sort of becomes another kind of family that was explored in these short stories as well. It was kind of, oh, I thought of an idea by Kawabata, who's a master for
Yep.
me.
Yep. Yep.
And then having sort of the idea of Kawabata in mind means that you can explore a certain terrain with that in mind. Not to try to imitate him. Imitate him is kind of hard. It's to go to that space where that part of your family is. I guess what I'm trying to do, Charles, is to avoid saying that I'm really programmatic in how I approach things.
Hmm. I know
I
that.
find that kind of death to me. If I set out to do something, I almost never do it.
I remember once we had lunch and uh, I mentioned the word deliberate in the context of
Mm,
good writing, and you
mm.
did not like that word. Uh,
No, it's a word that I guess for me, if I ever do writing that whose end point is known, it doesn't tend to be fiction. In an essay, I'll try to get to a certain point. So if
mhm.
I'm writing an essay, yes, that's a going towards a point, and it is deliberate. So yeah, it's if I'm writing about, as I'm writing about now, One Punch Man, a manga that I love, I want to get certain things clear about that. But if I'm writing a short story, I want to be in a place where I can explore so that I'm genuinely surprised. The first draft is like spelunking, and it's genuinely surprising as to what ends up there, and
Were
that
you
makes me
surprised?
happiest.
Okay, yes. Were you surprised that you were constantly tilting towards Trinidad, towards Ottawa, towards Petrolia, right? And
Yes,
so,
yeah,
were you
yes,
surprised that you were tilting towards wanting to explore father, son, mother, son,
yes, yeah,
parent, adult? You were. Okay,
yes. I discovered it at the end. I started to realize that by the time I wrote Consolation, which is the last
mm.
kind of story in it, that's when I started to realize, oh, wait a second, these things are all kind of tied together, aren't they? Hmm. And then you kind of understand what your psyche was doing, which is great. You put up a veil in front of yourself and do the work, and then at the end you go, oh, this is what it turns out to be.
That's the
There
right
always has
order.
to be, yeah, there always has
Yeah.
to be a bit of the unknown
Mhm.
in the process, which is why um, I love the idea of surrealism, but I like even more the idea of the ulipo, which is you try to do something that has such constraints on it that you couldn't predict what you were going to come up with. It's almost so n plus seven. Do you know what an n plus seven is? You take a
No.
text, any
Okay.
text, and you take every noun in that text, a short story by Hemingway, say, and you replace n, the noun, by the seventh one after it in a dictionary of your choice. And so the entire Hemingway short story now is something that is completely, usually garbled, but that you can sometimes use to create something that is a kind of midpoint between Hemingway and this other unknown. And I love the idea of being able to go towards that unknown. I don't use N plus seven. I don't tend to use Oulipian devices
Mhm.
um, anymore. But I really love the idea of truly discovering something that you could not have thought of yourself from when you're starting out.
I remember a very long while ago you wrote an essay about Christian Bach, partly about Christian Bach. And
Mm.
I think you obviously have had interest in that kind of writing
Yes,
in
yes.
yeah,
And
yeah.
by the way, I love Christian's work a lot. It's a pleasure for me to talk about it. But Christian is it's kind of interesting to me because Christian's work allows him, especially in the Xenotext, the
Mm.
two-volume poetry that just came out, it allows him to bring out the most deeply personal love, the loss of love, all of these things that are connected to his psyche and to pain and suffering and also redemption. But he never talks about the personal stuff. He always talks about the method. He'll talk about the constraints that he used to create such and such a thing. Because I think he feels it a little bit more justifiable to talk about the artistic method rather than what I enjoy in his work, which is a deep kind of expression of human um, agony, but also
Mhm.
pleasure, and also transcendence of agony through creativity. So I love his work, but whenever we talk about it, we tend to talk at cross purposes because
Cross
he
purposes, yeah.
acknowledges that his work is personal, but he wants to talk about how he got to that work, whereas I'm mostly interested in talking about, so what happened when she left you, Christian? Which
Yes.
he's not at all interested in talking about.
In other worlds, you you talk a lot, write a lot about medicine and magic.
Hmm.
What does medicine and magic mean in the book? Or how does it work together in
I'm not
congruence?
yeah, I can't really talk about it in terms of the book. I guess I can talk about it in terms of myself. My father was a doctor, and so when we moved to Canada from Trinidad, he studied at the University of Ottawa at the Department of Medicine. And there is something about the accoutrements of medicine. So we used to go by when on the way home, there was a lab, and you would see all these beakers and lighters and flasks and whatnot. And there was in my mind at that point, so I'm like 6 or 7, a connection between this process, this essentially magical process, and medicine. So they're tied like that in my psyche by accident because the School of Medicine, the lab happened to be visible, and I would stare in at this incredibly otherworldly environment of beakers and white lab coats and stuff that I didn't really understand that was tied to the medical. So that's why they're kind of tied in my mind. But also, let's face it, at the origin of medicine is kind of the idea of magic. I always love the story that my parents told me, which is that in the generation before theirs, people used to take spider webs and put them on cuts. And it was only later that it was discovered that, in fact, in the spider web, there was something to stop bleeding. And so, even though it's a completely difficult thing to imagine the thought process of taking a spider's web and putting it on you. It works, and they knew that it worked through experimentation and whatnot. So it's like medicine and magic are kind of like this in my mind.
Yes, yes. And medicine and magic run alongside each other, bump into each other, conflict with each other in a number of the
Yes,
stories
yes.
in contrition for sure. I feel like certainly in Pu Songling, Pu Songling
Yeah.
appreciation, and and we'll talk about the pronunciation a little more. The Hunanim, the Swiftian
Quinum. Quinum.
Hunum, which for those of you who don't know is from Jonathan Swift, and it's part four of Gulliver's Travels, and was what how he thought a horse might sound exhaling. Andre, kind
Yeah,
of
something like that, I think. Yeah.
Hunanim,
I'm not
yeah.
even sure if I pronounce it right, but
There,
Quinum is, I believe, how it's pronounced.
well, what are we gonna do? Ask the horse, right? You know.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can't.
But in all those stories, and I may not even have covered all of them, that the two magic and we can use other words for magic, healers, put it this way, we have doctors and then you also have healers and shamans running through the book.
Mm-hmm.
It feels to me like you want to have space for both conceptions of the real world and responses to the real world and bodies, and you aren't wishing to, in a sense, privilege one over the other. Would that be one way of thinking about those stories a bit?
Here you'd want to be very clear that there's a distinction between myself as a human being and myself as an artist or writer. I think it's important in an age in which science is under attack to stand up for the virtues of science. I believe in the virtues of medicine. I believe in the virtues of science. Not 100%. I mean,
Hmm.
I come from a time in which thalidomide existed, so I know that there are problems with science. But in an age in which there's a deep suspicion about the scientific process and science itself, I feel like it's important to stand up for those values, which are the values of a rationality. But I think when we're talking about fiction and art, we are talking about the exploration of a different realm. We're talking about the realm that includes dreams, trauma, the effort to get over trauma, the effort to understand questions that aren't dealt with in science. And that in a sense, there are these two worlds that exist in tandem against each other, or in the case where, you're talking about excuse me, medical processes that reach into kind of like the unconscious, like the using of spiders' webs or whatnot, where they can coexist together. But again, just being from an age where the intellectual is under fire, I want to insist on, I would personally want to insist on there being a realm for the rational that is it is important to distinguish in that realm what is the imaginary from the provable and repeatable. Whereas in the other realm, the realm of dreams, the realm of stories, the realm of taking care of the soul, repetition is not the important thing. The participation in a moment and the kind of recognition of what you are and where you are in relation to that artistic realm, that's important. Does that make sense, or am I just on blah
It,
blah blah?
it it totally makes sense. Yes,
Good.
yes. And I wasn't in any way suggesting that you're setting up a dualism. One, at least in the book, is very clearly put by the magic, if you will,
Yeah.
and with the uncanny uh, is very, to me at least, it's very clearly a way for readers to participate in that dream world, to experience that wider, deeper, stranger
Yeah.
comprehension. Yeah.
Do you know? I also, for me, that world is also. I'm, I'm not. I'm an agnostic. So I always call myself a Catholic agnostic in the sense that the God I have doubts about is the Catholic God. But I do feel like the realm of the spiritual is more connected to the realm of dream and participation in the, say, a Jungian unconscious, if such a thing exists or makes sense. That realm is part of the artistic realm. So I'm drawn to the religious spiritual in that aspect as well.
Let's, to go to the story,
Yeah,
Hunim,
yeah.
for a moment. I remember my wife and I both read it, and I said, "Oh, I think this is a story about grief." And she said, "No, I think it's a story about fathers and sons." And then because it was in the New Yorker, which is a very large audience, I heard from several different people, several different interpretations of that story.
That makes me happy.
I was about to ask you, does that make you happy?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think the interaction with story and with dream is as important as the dream or the story itself. I'm not, I wouldn't want to say what it was about
Right.
per se. I'm interacting with Jonathan Swift. I'm
Mhm.
interacting with, an idea of my father. I'm interacting with, Zan, who is Achilles' talking horse. So I'm interacting with
Right.
Homer. There's a lot of things that are going on, and you want those elements to exist in some sort of harmony. So the more interpretations, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
As an aside, Andre, did having the piece appear in the New Yorker with that enormous readership, was it in any way a different publishing experience for you?
Yes. I mean, I think, it was my first publication in the New Yorker, and I it was published at a time when I wasn't sure that the New Yorker was still influential. And so it was a bit of a surprise to see, oh, people actually still read it, they listen to
Yeah.
the fiction. It's a thing that is maybe still a fairly crucial aspect of North American English fiction creation. So the just the fact that so many people read it was great. The second time I published in it, it was less noticed. It was less of a thing, and it was less of a thing on my part. But it was also an awareness again that that place has a kind of tradition, and you become part of a bunch of writers that are published in
Hmm.
the New Yorker, and that's both interesting and kind of non-interesting as well. It's weird.
Well,
I'm
well, it seems
ambivalent about everything in life, Charles. Everything.
okay, except your two guitars behind you, and which we
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
get. No, but you just mentioned that by publishing the New Yorker, you kind of become an automatic member of a very esteemed group of writers associated with the magazine.
And some
And
bad writers too, by the way.
fair enough, no doubt. And something about you that I've always admired and appreciated is that you are openly in conversation with great books and great authors,
Yeah,
openly.
true.
And so, in a sense, the New Yorker is a kind of adding to that conversation just a little bit. I mean, Andre, just simply how many writers you mentioned, just in the context of the first of Hunim, the short story, the New Yorker short story, that you were sort of dialoguing with or thinking about.
Hmm.
Not a lot of writers, my experience of late is that they don't tend to call on those deeper, older sources as much. So,
I wonder whether they don't do it subconsciously. I wonder whether you can't look at a story by Jan Martel, one of my
right.
contemporaries who I happen to love. And if you are careful, you will see. Now, he directly
Yeah.
took a little idea from somebody who was a
Mhm.
Brazilian writer. But I think that if you were to look, and actually, he's doing something that comes from Homer now.
That's right.
So I think if you were to look at Jan's work, whether he in an interview would talk about them explicitly, I think you could find the trails of those things. There was a time, Charles, and you may remember when there was talk of by Harold Bloom, the anxiety of influence,
I remember the
as
book.
if there,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it was the idea is that we have a kind of father literary personage that we look up to and imitate and then deny the relationship to, because in a Freudian kind of way, I love Tolstoy, so I want to kill Tolstoy off in my work, or I love Beckett, I want to kill Beckett off in my work because Beckett is the father figure. And my problem with that is that influence is subterranean, difficult to access, difficult to say which influence is more important.
Hmm.
You can find yourself realizing, if you read back one of your stories, that you have taken something from Tommaso Landolfi, an Italian writer that I like, and go, well, I wasn't aware that Tommaso Landolfi was a father figure, was someone that had this great an influence on you, but they do. Tolstoy was marked, like that was a really strong kind of introduction to literature. But even with Tolstoy, I'm not sure that he has had as big an effect on me as Kawabata, who came much later. So the problem I have with this whole anxiety of influence thing is that it suggests that there is a primal influence that one struggles with, and there are probably many, and that you can find their traces. They leave their traces. There are many traces in the work. I think for Bloom, it was more a matter of delineating families of writers. It was more a matter of putting them in certain order and places, and that
And the Freudians too were always
the
trying to kill
Freudians.
someone. They're always trying to kill
Yeah,
someone or
yeah,
sleep with
yeah,
someone. Or it's very,
yeah,
whereas
yeah,
uh, I don't
exactly.
think. I wanted to speaking of parents, I felt in that throughout Other Worlds, you were honoring the relationship between children and parents indirectly, but all the time, almost every story. Even, excuse me, even the Pu Song Ling, which is a mentor-mentee, it had a kind of parent-child dynamic to it.
Yes.
Were you are you pleased that I was picking that up as I was going through the book?
It's the same and almost inevitable. It comes from the same place, I think, psychically, that when you're thinking about the parental, either your actual parents or the people who have influenced you, you will naturally think about yourself in that relationship. And so you're the child in relationship to the parent. You're the newcomer in relationship to Pusong Ling, to Yasunari Kawabata, to Witold Gombrowicz, to Dostoevsky. So it's not quite the child, but it's in relationship to them, I'm coming after and thinking about the worlds that they've created. And so the idea of the child comes naturally when you're thinking about the parent. And so it it's impossible to do one without the other in a way. They come as a pair. And so
Yes.
yes, picking up on how many children there are, sons in particular, makes
Mhm.
perfect sense.
Pu Song Ling, an appreciation, the name of that story.
Yes.
You could easily take the relationship between the older doctor and the younger apprentice
Doctor. Yeah.
doctor and recast it as any apprenticeship, any mentorship,
Yes. And in
artistic,
fact, I sort of thought
scientific.
of my yeah, I sort of thought of my daughter as I was writing that character. She's not at all like my daughter. Lucinda Sue is not at all like my daughter, but I was aware of my own daughter as I was writing that story, and so that seed of that person, my daughter Nicola, was in Lucinda,
Mhm.
and something of the combative relationship that Nicola and I have, it's a loving um, combat. It's not a stressful one, but something of that combative back and forth between myself and my daughter was part of the relationship between Lucinda and Professor. What's his last name now? Isn't it weird that I can't
Oh,
remember?
yeah, the guy, anyways.
Yeah,
Yeah, let me
yeah.
look him up.
Uh, um, and so, in a way, you could say that if there is an avatar of myself
Hmm.
uh, in that collection, that professor would be, in fact, my avatar, myself of the anxiety of passing on something precious to your daughter, and the realization that your daughter, you probably influenced her in the first few minutes of her life or the first years of her life. Then after that, you have to have faith that her fate is beyond what you want her fate to be. It's grander than your desires for her, and that you have at some point to let go of your
Hmm.
grand designs for, in my case, for my daughter, for my child. It's a
Andre,
big letting go, isn't it?
it, it it is, and I have a daughters in their 30s, and
Yeah, me too.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
complicated. It's complex. It's simultaneously something you very much want to do and you dread doing.
Well, I
Letting
think it
go.
also comes from, I don't know if this happened to you, Charles, but when my daughter was born, I just all of a sudden saw the world as darkness and as forces that wanted to damage my child. And if there is a maternal instinct, there's probably also a paternal, and that's a big if. I don't know about instincts and I don't know about naming them. But if there's a paternal instinct, it comes on you in its coloring of the world, that it makes the world dark, that it makes it a place where you need to protect this flame that has come into being. I'd love to have had a son as well as a daughter to know the difference, because part of me wonders whether you're more protective towards daughters than you are towards sons. I don't know, but yeah, I felt that with my daughter's birth, I became a parent, and that becoming a parent is changing your sense of the world radically. And it goes back a little bit more to normal once they get a bit older and you start to relax. I would, I assume that once you've had your fifth kid, the world doesn't change quite so much. But it did for me. It was a shock. And I suppose something of the memory of that surprise of Nicola's birth is in that story. So that's the moment when I'm a parent.
Yes, yes. You did in an interview a while back, you said that at the heart of my work is immigration and exile.
Yes.
And I might have wondered about that a bit with the novel series, but it's very front and center of Other Worlds, immigration and exile. Was it is it more on your mind now than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago?
No, Charles, and I think the best way I can think about it in terms of the quincunx is that the quincunx is filled with things that you can't be sure of. I sometimes put in things that I don't even know. I'll grab a book at random and write something from it, and I'll forget the things that have gone into it. And that's purposeful to make the novel, say, pastoral or Days by Moonlight, a mysterious object in which you're not sure what has real significance and doesn't. And that for me is the heart of being an immigrant, is like being in a world where things have meaning. You're just not sure which meaning supersedes the other, or which is the most important thing, which is insignificant. It takes you a while to come to terms with the kind of echelon of meaning when you're in a new environment. And so, in a way, the quincunx, all of those five novels, are a way of making the reader an immigrant. The reader has to come in and figure out for themselves what's meant to be funny, what's not meant to be funny, why is this reoccurring? What's the significance of this reoccurring thing? It's that putting the reader in the space where they're surrounded by a universe or a world of different symbols whose weight they don't know. That's the essence of the immigrant experience for me, and that's also part of other worlds. But I would argue that that's probably a major part of everything that I've ever done. That if you wanted to talk about my work, insofar as I understand it, there is a desire to communicate to the reader what it's like to be lost in a symbol world that you're unsure of.
Andre, before, just I want to let the folks know that we have about 20 minutes and we'll get to some questions in about 10 minutes. So if anybody wants to get busy typing, please do. I hear you, and I understand that the quincunx, in a sense, is demonstrating how the world looks to an immigrant or an
Mm.
exile in that uncertainty, feeling of being displaced, not quite knowing. At the same time, though, Andre, you open other worlds with contrition, in which a Trinidadian shaman finds himself, who dies in 1850 something, finds himself reincarnated or returned in the body of a adolescent boy in Petrolia, Ontario in the 1960, I think 57.
1957. Yeah.
So that felt to me like you were not being more explicit, but being more direct in establishing an actual voyage metaphor, an immigrant metaphor.
That's true. I guess we should add also, because there's a possibility that people might think that the idea of being an immigrant is a negative one, that there is only the confusion of, trying to figure out what means what and where you belong and where you fit in, and the uncertainty. But there is also at the heart of it a possibility of a deep reimagining, a recreating, a creating the world anew. And that's the positive side of the immigrant experience, is that if you can get over the uncertainty, there is the possibility beyond that of the recreation of a world that is hospitable to you. And that's the joyous part of immigration. In contrition, the metaphor is obviously the immigrant experience. Like, all of a sudden, some guy from 1857 finds himself in Petrolia, and I can't imagine a place less like Trinidad than Petrolia, Ontario, in 1957. And so, in a way, you're looking at a guy who's come from the bush in Trinidad, and all of a sudden has to understand what how terrifying Donald Duck actually is. I mean, just the idea of Disney characters being amusing is horrifying to him, because, of course, it's so far from anything like the nature that he has already known. Never mind that it's on a medium, television, that he's never known before. But I love that aspect of it, that we have come in North America, Canada at that time, in Ontario, far enough away from the living on the land of Petrolia, that everything that I took for granted when I was growing up, I got to see as incredibly weird. Um, the malls in London, Ontario, yeah, what it's like to walk in a Sears for the first time, even in the 1950s. Watching Woody Woodpecker and Walt Disney, how deeply peculiar that is if you remove yourself from the environment in which it's natural.
The book closes with what appears to be an essay. And I'm not asking you to pin that down, but the collection is called Stories, but the first person voice sounds like it has the same dates, the same names of siblings, parents, grandparents. That voice, Andre, in the final wonderful short essay says, "If I have a home, it is in Trinidad circa 1957, which is the year of your birth." What do you mean by that? If I have a home, it is in Trinidad circa 1957.
I guess I meant, and I have to sort of like recreate what I meant at the time. I guess for me, the primal place is Trinidad, and the primal first, as in first, relationship to the world is with Trinidad, and that's inescapable. That in a way, if you have to go back to the original place, if you go back to your origin at death, then I'm going back to Trinidad in 1957. It smells, it sounds, the closeness of my grandparents' home, the relationship that I have to my uncles and my aunts, all of that stuff becomes that is absolutely primal for me. And that if one takes the idea of home as being this primal place, then the only home I actually have is 1957 Trinidad, which I lost a long time ago. Despite my efforts to find a home, if we're taking that original place as the only thing that is home, then I've lost it. Although I'm constantly searching for it. Although I also find sometimes I find something that I think is home, and I immediately dislike it. It's sort of like I don't know if you do this, Charles, where you like you've just gone to Europe for, let's say, a month. You've been in Berlin, a city that I adore, for a year. I was in Berlin for a year. I was like, I love it. For 6 months, I loved it. 7 months, 8 months, I loved it. But then after a while, I kind of wanted to go home. I kind of, as the time to go home was approaching, um, Canada came back to me with a certain force, and I wanted to go home. I wanted to see the color of the skies, which is a faded blue, which is the opposite of European blue, and I couldn't care less. I love its fadedness. I love what this country looks like. And then I get home and I'm home and it's like, oh, my daughter's here, my house is here, my partner lives here. And about a month in, I just want to leave. I just want to go somewhere else. Maybe to recreate both the feeling of emigrating, which is
Mhm.
a kind of primal feeling for me too, but also to re-feel again that kind of sense of loss for some primal place. And the primal place has become Canada for me.
Before we get to some questions, we have a few, Andre. In that essay, you also write plaintively, I'd say, or about language that
Mm.
you and you close the book with a tiny note about Garifuna. Is that pronounced correctly? The
Garifuna, yeah, yeah, I
Garifuna,
think so. Yeah.
the a language from the Caribbean and from Trinidad, the language presumably that your character in the very first story would have spoken.
Spoke. Yeah.
Yes. And his Tam Modeste. And Tam Modeste may, in fact, be an actual or at least a psychic ancestor of yours.
Well, in a
And
sense, I mean, he has some of the reputation for magic as my great grandfather.
okay.
And there was something really wonderful in that Garifuna doesn't have a large literary tradition. It's a spoken language.
Mhm.
And I first heard it when I was doing research for this to find out what Tam's language might be like. And if I'm right, if my assumptions are right, that my great grandfather, who was a native Carib, so part of me is indigenous Trinidadian or indigenous South American, because I think Garifuna comes also from like that Venezuela and whatnot. It was really interesting for me to have to reproduce the language of my great grandfather when I did the audiobook. There's just like a connection to these sounds that was still really interesting to me.
Did
I
you
like
did
that.
you did you have anyone you could consult when you were doing the audiobook, or did you just kind
It
of
was really
intuit
hell
it?
finding somebody. It was hell on earth finding somebody. I mean, I remember we found somebody who's at the University of Oregon or something, who's an expert in Caribbean languages, ancient Caribbean languages. And so I got in touch with him, and he was all like, "Oh, this is wonderful, and it's glad that you're interested," and then ghosted me. Like,
Oh,
absolutely did not talk to me again afterwards, when I was asking him questions. Um, but we found a man who lives in New York, and so
okay.
there is a Black Caribbean community of speakers in New York, and he did the translation. Now, his Garifuna would be obviously very different from the Garifuna that my great grandfather would have spoken 100 years ago, but it was the nearest approximation that I could have.
And Andre, final question. The shame you write
Hmm.
about
Hmm.
that you say is at the heart of my relationship with language. Is it
Hmm.
because of the loss of ancestral language? Is it because of the displacement? What shame is at the heart of your relationship with language, or do you mean English language?
I mean, language, and the shame comes from, and I'm very happy about this. I'm not criticizing my parents at all. But when it came time for me to go to grade one in Ottawa, they decided that it would be good to send me to Gavno. So L'École Gavno was where I went, and I had no idea what French was. The language I encountered it the first day of school in grade one, and it was traumatizing. Everybody else spoke these codes, this language, this thing, and I could not. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand. And so that primary experience of another language, and it's kind of at the moment where I kind of realized that language is this thing that exists both within me and outside of me. And it's in that relationship that there is the possibility of a shame. And the shame comes from not understanding, from not having knowledge of this thing that everybody around you knows. Why don't you? And so there's been a kind of a wanting to learn and a shame at not being able to learn certain languages. Part of what I loved about being in Berlin, I was in Berlin uh, for the COVID year, so 2020. And I was so happy to be in Berlin. I asked for I had a residency there, and I got a big, huge apartment because my family everybody was going to come and visit me. Well, not when the borders closed, they weren't. So I basically spent a year by myself in Berlin in this huge apartment, and my one of my few contacts, my only regular contact, was the twice a week German lesson that I took. And
Okay.
so I loved learning German, and it recreated in a way the experience of learning French, just being immersed in this place. I love the German language so much, I can't tell you. The idea that it's rough or crude or anything like that is such complete bullshit. It is a beautiful, beautiful language. I only wish that I knew it more. So I read the Brothers Grimm for the first time in German when I was there, which was also because I so love folk tales, a kind of primary kind of feeling. Loved it. If anybody
Audrey,
speaks German, I love you.
we have time for a few questions. So I'll just get to them. The first question is about your play, Lambton, Kent, first
Yes.
performed in 1995, published in
Hmm.
1999. I am curious, asked Bertha Rose Park. Bertha asks, I live near Petrolia in Lambton. I am close to the Oil Museum in Lambton County. Can you tell me about your play? Why did you write it?
It's a long time ago, so I'm not quite sure why I wrote it. It feels kind of like typical for me in that it's exploring Southern Ontario as a very peculiar place, so if you imagine me starting in Trinidad and then how weird Ottawa was because we moved to Ottawa from Trinidad, and then even weirder than Ottawa was Petrolia in Lambton County. And Lambton, Kent is a kind of playful way of uh, dealing with or recreating the mystery of southwestern Ontario, which is a haunted and beautiful place in my imagination. I know a lot of people think it's boring or whatnot. I think it's marvelous.
Well, Andre, down below we have another comment from Bertha again that she goes often to Petrolia to the theater. Andre,
Yeah, it's a gorgeous theater.
Did you have anything to do with the Victoria Playhouse there?
No, no, no. Unfortunately, I know it because it was rebuilt. I think it was rebuilt sometime just after we left. It's a gorgeous old theater, and I would love to. It would be great. I would go to Petrolia if somebody did a version of, I guess it would have to be 15 dogs. If they did 15 dogs in Petrolia, I would actually go because it would be fun to see that there in that
All
spot.
right, Bertha Rose Park. This is your chance to speak to the folks at Victoria Playhouse and
Crow's
say
Theater.
yes,
Yeah, I
and
think you have
say,
to get in touch with Marie Farsi, who's the playwright,
all right,
and Crow's Theater, and ask them if you could do it in
and
Petrolia. That would be amusing to me.
an anonymous attendee, Andre, has two questions. We'll go with the second one because it's easy. What year of New Yorker magazines did your fiction appear? 2022, I think, for the
Yeah, I think
first,
so.
for
Yeah,
Hoda,
and
and
then
then Consolation was
24.
24. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. The other question, I was struck by the fact that the words heal or healer are completely absent in other worlds, excuse me, despite the prevalence of characters who, in very fundamental terms, have chosen to be or been chosen to be healers of a sort, albeit
Mm,
flawed. And of
mm,
course, Paul's, Tam's shared journey could be viewed as one of healing.
absolutely.
Were you aware of this omission? Was it intentional?
No, I wasn't aware of it, and it wasn't intentional, but it makes sense because I do have a tendency to hide things that are important. And so that's kind of the work of my psyche, I would think, just sort of like, I'm not going to mention that because it's too obvious. Like I have a horror of being too obvious. So it would have been something that I would have done unconsciously.
Okay. Trevor Phillips has a question. The characters that you create, how much do you control what they feel, taste, smell, hear, or do you give them license to have those experiences and then you act as chronicler? Just wanted to understand your interaction with your characters.
So let's take the interaction with dogs and talk about 15 dogs because obviously I have no idea what it's like to be a dog. I went from certain hints that I had that were fairly random. I say this often and I'll say it again. One of the biggest, most important things for me in writing 15 Dogs was listening to a radio documentary in which they wanted to tell you, to explain to you what like a dog's sense of smell would be like. And so their example was if you walk into a room and an Irish stew is cooking, you tend to smell an Irish stew. Whereas if a dog walks into the room where an Irish stew is cooking, it can smell each of its constituent parts fairly easily. So it'll smell the salt, it'll smell the pepper, it will smell thyme if you used it, it will smell the way the potato is. The wealth available to you smell wise was a huge thing for me. So that when I was thinking about dogs, the scent world, the odor world of Toronto was absolutely vivid to me because I all of a sudden had to imagine it as a scent first environment. So I would literally, so I know when I go past Atlantic and I go under that bridge, I realized it was just pure pigeon shit. And so that all of a sudden became clear to me as I went past that bridge. Just as, when you're going down by the treatment plant near the beaches, it smells like shit. Again, very big, in your face kind of smells. And the world of Toronto became that smell forward. And my characters, their life in that environment was smell forward. And that kind of it was somewhat determining on how I would describe their environment, which was important to them. but also their nerves, their non-nerves. When Benji dies, he smells the trap of the poison. All of that stuff became like a fundamental aspect of their characteristics. And I suppose, in a way, you could say that about the human characters in my work, that I work with certain environmental things, but I got to say, it may be that 15 Dogs has changed my writing period, because there's a lot more smells in my work, I think, afterwards. But before then, I would have said that environments were still important. Rooms, the color of a wallpaper, the way that pine smells. There were certain things that were still like smell related, but not as much as after 15 Dogs. Now I think of smells almost as quickly as I think of sights.
Jacob has joined us. Just before we sign off, Jacob, I know we're running out of time. I just want to do two quick things. Bertha has an update. The theater in Petrolia burned down in 1989, but it has been rebuilt.
Yeah.
And then a lovely final comment about other worlds from an attendee. Also, as a Canadian-born daughter of displaced persons who came to Canada under circumstances not of their choosing, I want to just comment on how deeply resonant Other Worlds was for me. But especially, I want to thank you for some deeply important insights. An elegy, the essay at the end, brought to me about my own experiences of and relationship to language. So just a sweet comment about the book.
Yeah.
André, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for joining us. And I'll turn it back. It was a lovely conversation, André. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you. Bye.
Jacob.
Yeah, thank you guys both so much. That was fantastic. And yeah, again, big thanks to everybody in the audience for joining us. We so appreciate you guys making the time for Canadian writing. A few quick reminders before we get going tonight. If you know somebody who couldn't make it tonight, please make sure to let them know that this conversation was recorded and it's going to be up on our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow. Please also make sure you join us for our next Giller Book Club. Our next book club will be on Wednesday, March 25th. Author and former Giller juror Kevin Chong is going to be interviewing Joanna Cockerline about Joanna's longlisted novel, Still. If you've already joined our mailing list, then you're going to get a link for that right into your inbox. But if you haven't done that yet, then please make sure you head over to gillerprize.ca to sign up. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care, everybody.